All right, hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Sunday, September 25th, 2022. This is your morning tropical update. We're looking at the Atlantic Basin here today with Tropical Storm Ian being the vast focus of our attention here on the East Coast as we watch the system get going here today. The rest of the basin is pretty quiet. We have Tropical Storm Gaston about to die off in the North Atlantic as a cold front approaches it. We have the remnants of Hermine was Tropical Storm Hermine, a sheared mess now. One of the titans of the Atlantic Basin, Wrath, is finally into north of Africa. And we have a little wave out here not doing much of anything. So Ian is our only focus of attention today. This is the latest in the National Hurricane Center. As of 8 a.m., the maximum sustained winds are 50 miles an hour, and the movement is to the west-northwest at their best guess at 12 miles per hour. We have a hurricane warning in effect for some of the Cayman Islands, tropical storm watches for others, and also a hurricane watch in effect for Cuba. That will become a hurricane warning later today. Overnight, Ian has not actually really taken off as we maybe thought it would have by now. The satellite presentation of Ian remains pretty ragged. We're going to start on the infrared satellite imagery, and we can see that the popcorn sort of convection with the storm has been continuing throughout the night. Ian was not able to take advantage of that convective maximum, and I want to point out a couple of quick things as we watch the satellite loop here. Watch these little reds and blacks here or the blacks and whites really within the red. That's the deep convection that the storm is looking to sustain, and it's not really able to do that this morning. We see it pop up and die off. And the other thing we don't see a lot of is the stratiform mid-level, storms that really kind of help keep these storms activated. This mid-level stratiform precipitation is what kind of helps consolidate and insulate the thunderstorm activity, and it keeps falling apart. So this is kind of curious because Ian should not have too many issues with thunderstorm activity yet. The water beneath it is very warm. It's in a very light wind shear. So the only real explanation is that Ian really hasn't fully aligned its low and mid level centers. We can kind of see evidence of that on satellite. If we click back over to the visible morning loop here, we can see that the center of mid-level Ian's mid-level circulation center is somewhere about here, a little bit north of 15 north. This is kind of the mid-level circulation center. This is kind of in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. The low-level circulation center, though, is not the same. The hurricane hunters found this right at about 15 north this morning, and it was lagging a bit southeast of where the mid-level center is. So we just drew you as somewhere like right here, and the low-level center somewhere back here. So the vortex is tilting with height, and how I would describe that is if you took a top or like a dreidel or something and you spun it, if it's leaning and the mass of it is rotating like within itself, and it's not going to be able to spin as fast or as efficiently as if the top is straight up and down and it's spinning perfectly right on its axis. So if the whole vortex tilts, it throws off the circulation because of the physics of it. It has to kind of pull itself around, and this has caused Ian to struggle, and it's causing those thunderstorms to not fire and sustain, which is what the storm has to do to lower pressures and increase its strength and intensity and go from there. The only two explanations we have is that Ian is also a pretty broad, this is a pretty big tropical storm, all things considered. This is a fairly large circulation, and sometimes large circulations just take a while to pull themselves together. No matter how good of a condition you give them, they just take a while to get going, and there could be a little bit of dry air sneaking around the system from the Western Caribbean. It's not a lot of dry air, but some of this could be feeding back around and into Ian. It's not a lot of dry air, but when you have these kind of fledgling tropical storms getting going, it doesn't take a lot of dry air to interrupt them before they kind of are able to get themselves figured out. So Ian still has plenty of warm water and light wind shear ahead of it, and all indications are that Ian is still going to quickly intensify sometime later today or going into Monday and Tuesday. So that has not changed. But again, the overall look of this again is just not great. We also have the kind of a low level scan of the storm, kind of an X-ray, and there is not a very coherent low level vortex with this storm yet, so it is struggling to get itself together still today, but it will, and when it does, it can still take off. The Hurricane Center still forecasts this to become a hurricane within the next 24 hours and a major hurricane within 48 hours. And if that sounds unreasonable looking at the satellite presentation, remember over in the Western Pacific, Super Typhoon Noru, which is hitting the Philippines today, went from a category nothing, as in a tropical storm, to a Cat 5 in 24 hours. So do not think that even though Ian is struggling today, that it can't still take off and become a very powerful hurricane. This will be a powerful hurricane later this week. There's little doubt about that. It's just the exact look at that is questionable. So why are we talking about the intensity in the short term? Well, that does matter for the track a little bit because a weaker Ian is going to want to move off a little more to the northwest sooner, where a stronger Ian is going to want to take off a little more off to the west. And this is what our two different computer models are struggling with today. The GFS has had that consistently more westward track. The European model has that more, northwest track. They both bring Ian up to the Cuban Peninsula or the edge of Western Cuba sometime around Tuesday. You can see the National Hurricane Center forecast has this landfalling in Western Cuba on Tuesday, and both models bring that up there about that time. So the GFS model brings it right across the western tip of Cuba, 12Z on Tuesday, which is Tuesday morning. The European model does about the same, although you can see there's a slight subtle difference as the Euro begins to make that more hook, where the GFS was kind of more of a lazily grazing the western edge of Cuba. But the 12Z, there's a little bit of an eastward shift from the GFS to the Euro, GFS here, Euro here, but largely they're in the same relative position. The GFS sees a stronger storm, Euro sees a bit of a weaker storm, but they're both here on Tuesday morning as the storm is leaving the western tip of Cuba. Now, Cuba is not a very mountainous island or anything. It's a speed bump, essentially, for these storms. It'll break it up for a few hours, but it's not going to cause much in the way of weakening. Um, Cuba is just not a very mountainous. It's not like Hispaniola or Puerto Rico or something. This is about where our models then begin to differ. There's two different camps that we remain kind of looking at. The European model sees a faster, harder hooking in into the west coast of Florida around the Tampa region. We'll go ahead and just run you through the model here in the Euro. Shows a landfall sometime late Wednesday night into Thursday morning, right around the Tampa Bay area as a strong hurricane, a category 3 or 4 potentially hurricane, and then moves this up through much of Florida and just kind of washes out over the southeast U.S. So that's the European solution. The GFS solution then just simply takes this more off to the west and drags it up more near the panhandle. Now, this is going to also impact the intensity of Ian at landfall, because here's the rub. The Hurricane Center believes that Ian will probably peak somewhere around Category 3 or 4 in the southern Gulf of Mexico on Wednesday. But then we believe that as we go into Thursday and Friday, Ian will begin to weaken. This is a response to an upper trough moving into the area. I'll show you here on the GFS. The track, though, matters for how much Ian can weaken. If Ian goes further west, this is going to put the storm up in the strong upper level flow over the Gulf of Mexico towards the end of the week. This upper trough that's pulling Ian north will also begin to interact with Ian directly, not indirectly. So the storm moves up on the GFS. We'll take the westward solution first. You can see by Thursday morning, you're embedded in this deeper southwest flow. This flow will begin to shear the storm from the southwest and will begin to weaken Ian. It will also be pushing dry air into the storm. Again, you can see here this finger of dry air, all these browns moving up into the storm will begin to weaken the storm as well. And we can watch the GFS, just we'll take it to landfall here on this model. You can see the pressure peaks at about 945 millibars. It's about as low as it gets in the northern Gulf here on Thursday, Wednesday night, Thursday morning. And then it starts filling 950, 960. It rapidly begins to weaken as it approaches and actually makes landfall somewhere in the 980s, which is still a hurricane, but it is a weakening hurricane. You see a lot of dry air rushing into the storm, and Ian would be filling at that point. Okay, the European model sees something different. Remember, the Euro hooks harder and moves into western Florida much sooner. This puts, that landfall forecast from the GFS is putting Ian landfalling sometime Friday morning. Now, the European model does not see that. The European model, again, sees that landfall sometime Wednesday afternoon. So we're talking about a 36-hour split because you're going up further and taking longer to make landfall. This line on the left is much longer than the line on the right is. The other thing that does is it does not let Ian get into the strong upper flow that much. It's in it a little bit by landfall, but not much. It wouldn't be much time to weaken it. This flow has to have some time to begin to shear it and knock it down. It doesn't have that opportunity because Ian moves off quicker and to the west, makes landfall in the Tampa Bay region as a category on this model 3 hurricane. And it would be a major hurricane. It would be a significant hurricane, and that dry air and wind shear simply would not have time to bring the storm down. Now, I'll show you what potential impacts that could be here, and I'm not going to go too much in the impacts yet because we don't really have a confidence in where exactly this winds up. But just going to show you some of the options here. The European model's harder right hook is going to be devastating for Tampa Bay. This would be the worst hurricane you've taken since the 1920s, and if this verifies, it will be a borderline catastrophic hurricane for the Tampa Bay region. I cannot stress enough that how bad this would be. If a hurricane comes in at category 3 or 4 intensity just north of Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay is open to the southeast or southwest rather. All that southeast wind pummeling into the bay would cause a massive water rise, and along with wind gusts well over 100 miles an hour would be devastating. I don't want to overstate how bad that could be for Tampa Bay. This would cause a massive problem for weeks to come in the Tampa Bay area. The Tampa, Clearwater, St. Pete whole region. This would be very bad. The European model does bring that in, and again, the storm would not have that much time to weaken. In another camp, we have the GFS model, the model off further to the west, showing that more landfall in the Big Bend or sort of Tallahassee Panhandle region. And this would be a weaker storm. You see the wind gust forecast on the coast closer to the 60, 70 mile an hour range. I think is a little low. That would probably be like 80 to 90 is probably what I'd actually expect it to be at landfall. But you can see the wind gusts are a lot lower for Tampa Bay. And although there would still be water rise with a strong hurricane passing by, the storm would be far enough away the west coast of Florida would miss out on some of that storm surge. And like I said, that bay being open for the storm surge on the Euro, the storm surge would be prolific in Tampa Bay. It'd be the strongest y'all probably ever seen there, or very close to it. So definitely bad news if it takes that track. A little bit better news if it takes off to the west. The Hurricane Center's track kind of splits this difference. It does show you weakening Ian moving into the Big Bend, like Steinhatchee region sometime early on Friday, and weakening down from a major hurricane to a Category 1 or 2 hurricane. Still pretty, pretty life-threatening. And again, the west coast of Florida is very susceptible to storm surge up and down. This would be rough if it were able to get in there and do that. So this is still going to be a hard hit, but we just don't know exactly where and how this looks yet. And unfortunately, we may not have that clarity today. The model still remains split. You see the Hurricane Center lies in the middle of the ensemble, the suite of models, and then the European model holds on mostly to its rightward hook. GFS holds on to the left. In this kind of rule, the best guess is to kind of split the difference, is what the Hurricane Center is doing. So I think somewhere in the Big Bend and all of northern Florida is probably going to get a pretty good event from this. A lot of rainfall and definitely the threat of tornadoes, along with those wind gusts, especially at the coast, and that high storm surge. Any kind of storm moving up into here is going to create a pretty bad storm surge. We've got to make sure that we're looking at that potential threat. But that's what I got this morning, guys. Unfortunately, no final clarity on Ian. We are going to watch this carefully. But as Ian organizes better, I think we're going to get a lot better information, and we're going to get more upper air data, which is going to continue to refine these models. And we'll watch those trends carefully today. If the model trends start to come more together, the GFS starts shifting more east, Euro shifts more west, I think we're going to get a lot better understanding of what we may be looking at later this week. But for right now, anyone from Pensacola to Tampa needs to be preparing for the threat of a major hurricane this week. So that's mostly what I got for you guys this morning. I just want to show you real quick. Super Typhoon Noru did impact and make landfall in the Philippines as a Category 5 equivalent super typhoon. May have been a 4 actually at landfall. The storm was undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle as it made landfall. You can see the eye fills up with clouds as it moves in. But this was a devastating hit for the Philippines, who are used to these kind of storms, but normally there's better warning. This is only expected to be like a Category 1 at landfall yesterday, the day before, and all of a sudden Noru just exploded past all the intensity guidance and landfalled as a very strong Category 4 or 5 super typhoon. This is going to move across, peak again, and make a second landfall in Vietnam as a strong storm as well. So not the last we've heard of Noru, but just a bad hit over there as we were focused on Ian. Kind of this one slipped under the radar. But the most vulnerable place in the world for Category 5 cyclones just got yet another one, it looks like. So that's what I've got for you guys this morning. We'll have more on Ian this evening, and our next video probably will be sometime Monday evening. I don't know if I'll have another one, but we'll see. So that's what I got for you guys this morning on your topical update. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.